Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Authors at Google event. We are pleased today to welcome Mr. Jeremy Rifkin, a well-known economist and activist. He's probably best known for his work with the Foundation on Economic Trends, as well as his published works, which include The End of Work and the Hydrogen Economy. And both topics are very relevant to the work here we do at Google. Time magazine described Jeremy as the most hated man in science. But we love you. It's okay. Just ignore them. Today, he'll be speaking to us on his latest book, The Empathic Civilization. The book outlines the essential conflict between empathy and entropy, between thinking and doing. Jeremy suggests that this arises from the very way our consciousness is structured. And for those who have questions later, please use the mic for the benefit of those on YouTube. And with that, my friends, please welcome Jeremy Rifkin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Let me start off on a somber note, which I hope might become a liberating reflection. I believe we may be at a seminal turning point in the history of our species on this planet. Sounds melodramatic. I won't be here to see it, but all of you young people in this room, you may be a decisive generation. Species come and go. We had two events in the last 18 months which signal the end game for the great industrial age propelled by fossil fuels that gave us one of the great short-lived civilizations in history. July 2008, you recall oil hit $147 a barrel on world markets. Prices soared, inflation roared. Basic items became prohibitively expensive around the world, from groceries to gasoline. There were food riots in 30 countries. Purchasing power plummeted at $147 a barrel all over the world. The entire economic engine of the Industrial Revolution turned off at $147 a barrel. That was the economic meltdown. That was the earthquake. The collapse of the financial market 60 days later, that was the aftershock. G20, G8, G2. Our world leaders have not yet come to grips with what is really happening to the global economy. Our fossil fuel energies are sunsetting. Their S-curve is exhausted. And the entire infrastructure of this civilization is embedded in the carbon deposits of the Jurassic Age. Our agricultural food is grown in petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides. Almost all of our pharmaceutical products are still fossil fuel based. Most of our clothes, the entire construction infrastructure of civilization is fossil fuel based. Our power, transport, our heat, our light, our logistics, our supply chain. What we are seeing is the sunsetting of these energies and the life support of the infrastructure built from them. That's what we haven't yet come to grips with. The reason this has happened, it's what I call peak globalization, 147 a barrel, is something called peak oil per capita, not to be confused with peak oil production. They're two different things. Peak oil per capita actually occurred over 30 years ago in 1979 at the height of the Second Industrial Revolution. In that year, had we distributed all the oil reserves we knew we had to everyone living on the planet at that time, fairly and equitably, that would be the most oil each person could have. We found more oil since then, but population rose quicker. So if we distributed all the oil reserves we know we have now today to 6.8 billion people, there's less to go around per person. So you see where I'm heading. When China and India made their bid to bring 1/3 of the human race into the Industrial Revolution, propelled by and embedded into fossil fuels, the demand pressure was enormous. Prices went up, inflation soared, and the entire economic engine of the industrial age actually shorted out at 147 a barrel. Now you notice the economy is just slightly starting to move again around the world. That's because we had depleted inventories. We're replenishing them. And what's happening? Oil's shooting up to $80 a barrel again. So what I say to my colleagues is, show me how we get through that wall. Every time we try to regroup the global economy based on these sunsetting energies, with a huge amount of the developing world coming into the game, prices will go up, inflation will roar, purchasing power will plummet, and about 147 a barrel will keep hitting the wall. That's peak globalization. We now know the outer limits of the Industrial Revolution. We will look back at this moment as decisive. Fast forward, December 2009, Copenhagen. Our world leaders come together to try to address the entropy bill for the industrial age, the spent CO2, the exhausted energy. The UN climate panel, our scientists tell us that we may see a 3-degree rise in temperature on this planet, Celsius, in this century, because of the burning of carbon deposits over the last 200 years. It's probably going to go much higher. That's now optimistic. But to give you an idea of what 3-degree rise means, a 3-degree rise in temperature in this century, and your children, takes us back to the temperature on Earth 3 million years ago in the Pliocene. Different flora, different fauna, different hydrological cycles. And it's really all about the water. This is something folks really don't hear about. For every 1 degree centigrade that the temperature on the Earth rises, the atmosphere can absorb and does absorb 7% more precipitation, takes it up from the ground. That's why you're seeing more violent weather, more floods, longer periods of droughts, wildfires. Our ecosystems and our biomes have developed over millions of years. They cannot adjust to this kind of change this rapidly. I advise the European Union. We went to Copenhagen, and we were hoping to talk the world into mitigating CO2 at 450 parts per million by mid-century. Nobody wanted to play the game. But if we go to 450 parts per million, we were hoping we'd only go up 2 degrees. Devastating, but maybe we would survive. Then James Hansen, the chief climatologist for the United States government, threw us a curve in Brussels. He's the head of the NASA Goddard Space Institute. Their studies show that if we mitigate at 450 parts per million carbon by mid-century, your century, we go up 6 degrees Celsius, according to the geological record, and the end of human civilization as we've come to know it. We are asleep. The feedback loops are coming. We're really in denial. Our world leaders came together in Copenhagen. They could not cut a deal. It broke down in acrimony. The entire talks collapsed. So here's my question for all of you in Google. Why is it that our world leaders were simply unable to anticipate or respond to the meltdown of the Industrial Revolution at 147 a barrel? Still no analysis. Why was it that our world leaders were unable to cut a deal on carbon reduction and methane and nitrous oxide reduction at Copenhagen to address climate change, even though we know that this is imperiling our planet and threatening our own species? Certainly the biggest threat we've ever faced. The fault lies not with just the inability of government and business leaders to come up with new regulating mechanisms for the global economy. The fault lies deeper than just the inability to come up with a binding carbon reduction target that everyone could agree to. The fault lies with this. Our government and business leaders are relying on 18th century ideas about human nature and the human journey that were born at the beginning of the market and nation state era and spawned by the philosophers of the Enlightenment. Those ideas are completely ill-suited for the global economy and biosphere world, your world of the 21st century. For 1,500 years in Western civilization, the church worldview about human nature dominated. And the church said, little babies are born depraved, born in sin, born in evil. And if we want salvation, we need to wait to the next world with salvation in Christ. At the dawn of the market era and the nation-state governance, the philosophers of the Enlightenment took that worldview on, and they came up with a new set of ideas about human nature. And those new ideas were accompanied by new institutions, market institutions, nation-state governance, new educational institutions that comported with these new ideas. What were they? John Locke, the political philosopher of the Enlightenment, said, babies are born tabula rasa, blank slate. except he gave a little opening. He said there is a predisposition in human nature to acquire property. It's kind of funny, he kind of left that one. And if we acquire property, we become wealthy, and that's the road to happiness. Adam Smith, the great Scottish economist of the Enlightenment, said, little babies are born as rational, detached, autonomous agents. And as we grow up, we pursue our inner drive, which is our material self-interest in the market. The 19th century post-Enlightenment philosophers, Jeremy Bentham, he said, little babies are born and they seek pleasure over pain, and their core nature is utilitarian. The great naturalist Charles Darwin, later in the 19th century, said, every organism, every species, seeks to perpetuate themselves and reproduce their survival. And then, of course, at the end of the 19th century, Sigmund Freud suggested that little babies are born with an insatiable erotic sexual desire, and they need to extinguish their libido. That's the core drive. Okay, now, I don't know if there are any parents in this room. Do we have any parents in this room? Please, is this what human nature is about? That little baby, is that little baby born depraved and in sin? Is that little baby a rational, calculating, detached, autonomous agent pursuing their own material, utilitarian self-interest in a competitive struggle to survive? If that's who we really are, that is our core nature, we're likely doomed. I don't see any scenario on the horizon in which we can bring together 6.8 billion human beings to create a seamless, integrated, sustainable, and just global economy and address climate change and we heal the biosphere of the earth. Do you? And remember, ideas have consequences. Again, those ideas about human nature comported with and accompanied the institutions that justified them. Look at our schooling system, our parenting styles, our business models. They reflect the idea that we are aggressive, utilitarian, self-interested, materialistic, and pleasure-seeking. In the last 10 years, below the radar screen, in evolutionary biology, neurocognitive science, child development, and other related fields, our researchers are making breathtaking breakthroughs that are challenging some of the age-old assumptions about human nature. Let me take you back to the early 1990s. Sleepy little laboratory in Parma, Italy. There's a macaque monkey in the laboratory, and they've got a little MRI brain scanner on the monkey. And they're watching the monkey open up a nut and seeing which neurons light up with the brain scan. By sheer serendipity, and these are how these things happen, a human trainer walks into the lab right after this experiment, within minutes, and picks up a similar nut and tries to open it. The macaque is gazing straight at the trainer, not moving, and when they look at the scanning machine on the brain of the macaque, the same exact neurons were lighting up when he was observing someone else open the nut as when he was opening up the nut himself. They were flabbergasted. They had no idea what this was. They started to put brain scanners on other primates and then humans. Over and over again, they discovered something interesting in the neural circuits of some primates and all humans. And that is when a person experienced a certain feeling, disgust, rejection, pleasure, joy, frustration, anger, certain neurons would light up. If they then observed someone else experiencing those same feelings, the observer's same neurons would light up, exactly as if they were feeling that other person as if it were themselves. Now, we know this from common sense experience. If someone punctures himself and bleeds, you have the same wince as what's going on to them. Or when you see a little spider going up on someone's arm, you feel a creepy feeling in your biology. It's what we call empathic distress. What we are finding is that all animals that nurse their young are social, and they have some kind of empathic distress, not just mirror neurons, that's what we're discovering now, the empathy neurons, but a whole circuitry that allows them to actually play and groom and nurse social animals. Human beings with the big neocortex were ultimately social. The worst thing you can do to a human, ostracize them. That little baby comes out of the womb and immediately seeking some engagement, some reciprocity, intimacy, affection, a sense of belonging. We've discovered Homo empathicus. Empathy is very complicated. When a little babies are in the nursery and one baby cries, the other babies will cry. That's empathic distress, but they don't know why they're crying. Around 2.5 years of age, the baby can identify themselves in the mirror and say, oh, that's me, that's you. Self-reflection and selfhood go hand in hand with empathy. The more I have a sense of individuality, the more I can empathize with another individual. At around 7 or 8, we learn about birth and death. Then we know we have one and only life. We're fragile, we're vulnerable, we have frailties, and we understand that our life is unrepeatable. This existential sense of ourselves that we develop, that we have one and only history, we live and die, allows us to then feel that same thing in another person. Think about when you empathize with another human or another animal. It's that feeling of death and life all together. You feel their fragility, their frailties, their vulnerability, their one and only history, their one and only life, and you feel their struggle to flourish and be, because it's extremely hard being alive. Whether you're a human being or a fox in the wood or an ant on the ground, it is tough being alive. Empathy is the ability to actually feel another's struggle, their ability, their desire to flourish and be, and then show compassion and solidarity. The most alive moments in the world are when we feel this feeling of empathy, because we transcend ourselves and we live in that I-zone kind of middle zone there. By the way, empathy is the opposite of paradise and utopia. There's no empathy in heaven. Don't look for it. It's not there. There's no empathy in utopias because there's no mortality. Empathy is the opposite, because it is a recognition of life and death, our one and only journey. And that's why we feel solidarity and we feel such an expression of transcendence with our fellow human beings. The awe of life is right involved with that empathic sensibility. So here's the question. If we are wired for empathic distress, can we imagine a scenario in which we could extend the central nervous system, folks here in Google, to the entire human race? All of our fellow creatures in the biosphere in which we live. Can you imagine that? So now you're saying, oh my God, I just gave up my lunch for this. This guy's over the end. We can't even pass health care reform legislation. We just had a Supreme Court that said you can buy any election you want in this country, and this guy's up there talking about biosphere consciousness, the human family coming together. Well, this is the appropriate place, Google. Consciousness changes over history. The way our brains are wired this afternoon today in the 21st century, completely different than a medieval serf. And their brain, completely different in its wiring than a hunter-gatherer 30,000 BC. So the question is, what is the mechanism upon which consciousness changes over history and empathy evolves, if it does? Because if we can find the mechanism, perhaps we could see how we could take a leap and begin to think Homo empathicus, prepare an empathic civilization, create biosphere awareness. Now I want everyone in Google that's here in this room to concentrate with me from here on. You have a special mission, I think. The great changes in consciousness in history, they occur when two things happen. First, we change the way we organize the energy of the earth, and that's happened frequently through history. Second, we change the way we communicate to organize these new energy revolutions. It's when communication revolutions come together with energy revolutions, when they converge. Those are the pivotal points in history. They change human consciousness. They expand the empathic horizons, even with all the genocidal blowbacks. It keeps moving forward. I'll give you an example of energy communication convergence. You read about the Sumerians at the university in your cultural anthropology course. The Sumerians, ancient Mesopotamia, which was Iraq. They were the first to harness the sun's energy in photosynthesis in cereal plants. The stored grain, barley and wheat, was stored sun's energy. Complicated, because before that time, people lived in little villages, rain-fed garden agriculture. All of a sudden, they had to indenture thousands of men to build these long irrigation canals. Think of the logistics here. They had to create craft skills to manufacture, to make the dikes. They had to create the royal granaries, the royal roads, and distribution systems. They had to create urban life. It required a communication revolution, Google, to organize it. And they created writing, cuneiform. Everywhere we see these great hydraulic agricultural civilizations, The Middle East, the Indus Valley in India, China, Mexico. Fascinating. Independently, humans figure out writing to organize hydraulic agricultural life. Let's go all the way up to the 19th century. First Industrial Revolution, another convergence of communication and energy. The print technology revolution was upgraded with steam power. With steam power, linotype, and rotary, we could mass produce print quick and cheap. At that same time, between 1830 and 1880, we introduced public schools and mass literacy in Europe and America. And the first generation of print literate communication generation then was able to manage the first industrial revolution, coal, steam, and rail. We could not have organized coal, steam, and rail with codex. That communication was too parochial. 20th century, another convergence of communication and energy. Telegraph and telephone, then cinema, radio, later television, became the communication vehicle to manage oil, the internal combustion engine, the suburban rollout, the second industrial revolution. And that second industrial revolution peaked in July 2008 at 147 a barrel. Those energies are sunsetting the infrastructure on which they're embedded, life support. When communication and energy revolutions come together, the communication not only manages the new energy, it changes consciousness. Every forager, hunter society in history had oral communication. Their consciousness was mythological. Every single one had mythological consciousness, no exception. When we go to the great hydraulic agricultural civilizations, the new communication to organize agriculture was writing, script. Every single one of them created some form of theological consciousness. The great religions formed at that time in the Middle East. The Abrahamic religions, the people of the book, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. In the East, Buddhism, Confucianist philosophy, all based on script, theological consciousness. 19th century, convergence of communication and energy. Print communication gave rise to ideological consciousness. People thought ideologically in the 19th century. 20th century, second industrial revolution, first generation electricity communication ushered in psychological consciousness. We think therapeutically in this room. Grandma didn't. My grandma from 100 years ago, if my grandma were at Thanksgiving dinner and all of a sudden she throws the dish down on the floor, I'd come up to Grandma and say, Grandma, now wait a minute, that was a passive-aggressive act. We got some transference and projection problems here. Let's go back, something triggered from your childhood. Let's go deep into your psyche and let's understand what happened here. Grandma doesn't have a clue. She's ideological, she may be theological, maybe even mythological. She's not therapeutic, all right? Consciousness changes over history. And when consciousness changes, empathy extends itself. Now I want you to think Google, the real Google, your real mission in the 21st century. The communication revolutions allow us to extend the central nervous system so we can bring more diverse people together across time and space. So if you're in a forager-hunter society with oral communication and mythological thinking, your empathy doesn't extend beyond shouting distance, your blood kin, your relatives, because that's who you've got. Oral communication, forage and hunting, small spatial temporal limits. When we go to the great hydraulic agricultural civilizations, script allows us to extend the central nervous system, annihilate a little bit of time and space. Empathy extends beyond blood ties to associational ties, religious affiliations. Jews start to see other Jews as extended family and extend their empathy from blood ties to religious ties. Muslims empathize with Muslims, Christians with Christians. When we get to the 19th century, print communication with coal, steam, and rail extends the central nervous system and again annihilates time and space, right? People began to empathize around national boundaries. That's the extension of print communication. Americans start to see Americans as extended families and empathize with each other. The French with the French, the Japanese with the Japanese. Now we are on the cusp of a global economy and a biosphere era. Can we extend the boundaries of empathy that started with blood ties in local regions to religious affiliations, to national boundaries, and now to the human species in the biosphere? Hold that aside. There's a paradox in history. It's a deep paradox. In the Empathic Civilization, in this book, I write about this sub-theme, And it has never been discussed before, but it's something we really need to have a conversation about. There's a deep paradox in human history. It's the empathy-entropy paradox. And that is, as we create more complex energy-consuming civilizations and bring them together with more sophisticated communication so we can extend the central nervous system, bring more people together, heighten our sensibilities and our empathy, become more cosmopolitan, those same more complex energy-consuming civilizations increase the entropy bill. More energy, more depletion of resources, a bigger footprint. Today we live in the most interconnected, interdependent civilization in the world. We're connecting the central nervous system of the entire human race, and the same technologies that we are using right now are consuming vast amounts of the Earth's energy, taking us to the abyss of climate change and the potential extinction of our species. Bittersweet, because we can almost smell the summit with all the blowbacks. I mean, the xenophobism and the wars and the terrible things going on. We can actually smell the summit where we begin to think as a human species. Think Haiti. Within an hour, on Twitter and on YouTube and Google and everywhere, within an hour, the whole human race was responding with an empathic embrace. If the Enlightenment philosophers were right, and we are detached, calculating, rational, autonomous agents who pursue our own pleasure and libido and self-interest, you can't account for the response in Haiti. The response was now we have the technology, thanks to Google, to connect the entire human race at the speed of light. An empathic embrace. The problem is we're also smelling our potential extinction. We may get almost to the summit, and then that's it. We may lose ourselves. I really believe that's possible within less than 3 generations. How do you break the empathy-entropy paradox? This is where you come in, but I'm going to say you don't even know where you come in yet. We've got a lot of smart young people here, but here's where you come in. We are on the cusp of a third industrial revolution, a new convergence of communication and energy that could get us to distributed consciousness, thinking as Homo empathicus and create an empathic civilization. We had a very powerful ICT revolution in the last 15 years, the personal computer and the internet. Started with Microsoft, now we're at Google. We had this very powerful revolution. This is second generation electricity communication. First generation was centralized, top down. This new communication revolution is distributed, flat, and open. File sharing, YouTube, Wikipedia, Linux, Google. This distributed communication revolution is just now beginning to converge with the new energy revolution, distributed energy. When distributed communication manages distributed energy, we may be on the point of moving to distributed consciousness. Biosphere awareness. Thinking as Homo empathicus. What is distributed energy? Let's compare it with elite energies. Elite energies we know about. Coal, oil, gas, uranium, they're elite. They're elite because if you go home today, you're not going to find them in your backyard. Pretty good chance you won't find them there. They're only found in certain pockets of the world. They require huge military investments to secure them, huge geopolitical investments to manage them, massive capital to organize them. Be clear, fossil fuels and uranium have given us the most centralized, complex civilization in history. But those energies are sunsetting, and the infrastructure we've embedded them in are on life support. What are distributed energies? Go home tonight, all the energy you need is distributed across your backyard. The sun shines all over the world every day. The wind blows across this planet every day. Wherever we tread on the ground, there's a hot thermal core of heat under this earth for energy. Wherever there's water, we have small hydro for electricity. Wherever there's municipal waste, it can be regenerated back to energy. In the rural areas, we have agricultural and forestry waste. On the oceans, where most of the urban population is, those tides are coming in and out every single day. I've been privileged to work with the European Union for the last 10 years and was honored to develop the long-term Third Industrial Revolution game plan for the EU. It was endorsed by the Parliament in 2007. We're rolling it across 27 member states from the Irish Sea to Russia now. I'd like to lay this out for you here at Google because I think there's a pivotal role that you have yet to play but will play here, which will transform your company into something quite different. It'll take where you are, but take you to something that's going to create a legacy for the human race. Let me lay out this four-pillar third industrial revolution. Let me preface this by saying the EU is the lead economy in the world today. We think about G2, America and China. Wake-up call. The GDP of the 27 member states of the EU, which is a political union, exceeds the GDP of the 50 states of the United States of America. And if you put the GDP of the US and China together, it's almost matched by the EU. Here's the laboratory. Four-pillar infrastructure, third industrial revolution, to organize distributed communication, to manage distributed energy, to create distributed consciousness. First pillar, 20% renewable energy by 2020, mandated. That's a third of the electricity in Europe. Done deal. Pillar two, buildings. Buildings, buildings, buildings. Buildings are the number one cause of climate change. They are responsible for the third of the CO2. The number two cause of climate change, which we never talk about, is beef production and consumption. Nobody wants to talk about that, even Al Gore. Not one leader of 192 countries made a single statement about the number two cause of climate change. How serious are we about our own extinction? Number three is worldwide transport. So number one pillar of this infrastructure, renewable energy, mandated. Two, buildings. We imagine every single existing building across the EU, every home, office, factory, shopping mall, technology park that exists today, converted to a partial power plant in the next 25 to 30 years. So the building collects all the distributed energy around the neighborhood. The sun off the roof, the wind on the walls, the heat under the ground, the garbage, etc. Pillar three, storage. Because in California, as in elsewhere, the sun isn't always shining. The wind isn't always blowing. These are intermittent energies. So when the sun is out and the wind is blowing, you got to find a way to store some of that electricity. So the EU is committed to pillar three, an 8 billion euro rollout of hydrogen storage technology. So when the sun hits your roof or the wind hits the wall, you generate electricity. If you have surplus, you electrolyze water. Hydrogen comes into a cell from the water. And then when the sun isn't hitting the roof, convert it back. How many engineers here? Of course, now a lot of people will say, well, wait a minute, isn't that a waste of electricity twice? What every engineer knows is you cannot escape the second law of thermodynamics. That's what empathy entropy is all about. You always pay the bill. If we begin to understand the conversion price in bringing oil and uranium all the way to power to you, it's through the roof. So pillar one, renewable energy. Pillar two, the buildings become the power plants. They suck up the energy around the buildings, renewables. Pillar three, hydrogen storage. Pillar four, and this is where you come in. You're not quite there yet. Pillar four is where the distributed ICT revolution begins to manage the distributed energy revolution to create a third industrial revolution and hopefully distributed consciousness. We take the exact same technology that created the internet, identical. And we take the power grid of the European Union, hopefully North America and elsewhere, and we transform that power lines into an intergrid that acts like the internet. So that when millions and millions and millions of buildings across Europe are collecting a little bit of their own energy, renewables that are around the site, storing it with hydrogen like we store media in digital, and then sharing what they don't need across smart distributed grids across all of Europe. This is a third industrial revolution. This is power to the people. This is distributed capitalism. And this answers a question we couldn't answer for 30 years. For 30 years, governments would say to me, Mr. Rifkin, my gosh, we love windmills and solar roofs and garbage and all of that, but you can't run a global economy on these soft energies. You still need coal, oil, gas, uranium, tar sands. They're hard energy. We couldn't answer this question for 30 years, but now we can, thanks to your industry. It's called second generation grid IT. Last 7 years, we've got the answer. We now have software, grid IT, that allows us to connect hundreds of thousands or even millions of little desktop computers that don't have a lot of power. But when we connect them with grid IT software, the distributed power of hundreds of thousands of little desktop computers exceeds by a magnitude anything you can imagine with centralized supercomputers, correct? We can take grid IT to the power lines when millions and then hundreds of millions of structures are generating just a little bit of their energy on site, storing it with hydrogen like you store media and digital, then distributed sharing it across contiguous land masses, the great continents, the power exceeds anything you could ever imagine with centralized nuclear and coal-fired power plants. This is a generational shift. My generation still thinks centralized top-down and right-left. Your generation thinks differently, distributed, collaborative, open source. And right at the heart of it is right here at Google. Whole generation in this campus here. If we are able to make this shift, we can begin to imagine empathy extended in a distributed way across the world. That is, when everyone takes responsibility for that small swath of the biosphere where we live and harness the energy of the earth there and then share it across continents, we begin to think distributed responsibility for the human race. We have to be both entrepreneurial and collaborative. We have to create energy spaces that act like social spaces on the internet. We have to think commons. This is a revolution in thinking. It changes temporal spatial orientation. Unless we think this is impossible, you know what I imagine, and this will resonate with you folks here. Remember after the Iran elections that were flawed and the young students protested in the streets and the government started to get violent by shooting, and they shot a young college pre-med student, a young woman. And someone had a cell phone and they videoed it. And within an hour, across the world, because of Google and all of the communications, an entire generation was empathizing with the young students on the streets. That's biosphere consciousness. Today, in every school, our young people are learning from the time they're 6 or 7 that everything they do each day affects someone else. The food they eat, the clothes they wear, the electricity they use, the family car, every single thing they do actually intimately affects the well-being of another human or another animal on this planet. That's biosphere consciousness. The problem is, how do we break the paradox of history? More empathy, more entropy? A third industrial revolution gives your generation a shot because this is distributed. It's sustainable. It's think global and act local. There's no guarantee you're going to get there. I honestly don't know, when I look at all the younger folks here who will be around in 2050, 2075, I don't know whether they're going to make it. Our scientists say we only have a few more years to get one roadmap for the world. No mistakes, and we've got to get to a post-carbon era quickly. I hope the scientists are all wrong, but I think they're underestimating the speed of the feedback loops. So, how can consciousness change? Let me use an example. First, mirrors, and then I want to move up to Google Maps. How many of you looked in a mirror today? Raise your hands. You take that for granted, don't you? Do you realize that up to the 14th, 15th century, people did not see themselves clearly? That's why there wasn't a lot of hygiene and grooming back then. You could see yourself in a pond of water, whoa, as it's streaming down the river, or in a piece of metal. But in the 1400s, in Murano off Venice, they started mass producing mirrors, and they took these little mirrors, and whenever you bought a printed book, you got a mirror. All of a sudden, the new pastime, people started looking at themselves. Whoa, that's me. You, me. It wasn't about narcissism. It allowed people to create self-reflection. That's what mirrors do, reflect. So now we call it self-reflection. It allowed us to develop selfhood, more individuality, in a more existential sense of how I am not you, you are not I, but I can existentially support your struggle because I know you're a separate individual identity. Now let's go up to Google. When I was in my 20s, when I was young, and I remember in 1969 when the Apollo spaceship passed the dark side of the moon on the last journey, our guys came up on the bright side, the sun is shining on the earth, and in this ship they took some photos of the planet Earth. Those photos were put up on posters all over the world. That was an out-of-body experience. Today, because of Google, you have a whole generation that's wired their brain differently. You can take a Google map from outer space, zoom down anywhere on this planet into the door and window of any building. That out-of-body experience allows us to look from the outside in, from the upside down, so we get a sense of how small this is and how we're responsible because we're embedded in the entirety of this little sphere called the Earth. That is truly a new change in consciousness. People before that Google Maps, they did not have that sense of framework from the outside in and from the top down. So, can we make this in time? What we have now is 50% of the human race living above our means in a non-sustainable world with a big carbon footprint, 40% of the human race living on $2 a day or less, barely able to survive. How do we bring everyone together? How do we break the empathy entropy paradox? I think we revisit what makes us happy. Now remember, John Locke said the negation of nature, the acquisition of property, the material wealth makes us happy. Or to quote one of the great sages of the 20th century, material girl, material world, she got it wrong too. All right? But the new happiness studies are very interesting because they're showing us if you're really poor, you're not happy. You have very few emotional and empathic reserves to think about the polar bears. As you get wealthier, you get happier until you reach the threshold of what we call basic comfort. That's the threshold. Beyond that, the wealthier we get, the more unhappy we are. Envy comes in, empathy goes down, we become more insular and more isolated. So the question is, how do we take the top half of the human race in terms of wealth and learn to live more sustainably while the bottom half comes up to the threshold? And now I'm going to step on some toes here in the U.S. We got to move beyond the American dream. It's not suited for the biosphere world you're going into. That dream was the dream of the Enlightenment philosophy based on the idea that we're all detached, autonomous, individual agents who pursue our self-interest and our utility. And it worked for 2 centuries in a frontier when the world was being colonized. But can you imagine how we're going to bring the world together, create a global economy, save the biosphere with 6.8 billion cowboys, each pursuing their individual self-interest? There's a new dream emerging among your generation. It's not the American dream. It doesn't discount personal opportunity, but it puts it in a larger context. If you ask young people in Europe and much of America what the dream is, I hear more and more this term quality of life. We want a good quality of life. That's a community exercise. It requires individual empowerment and community collaboration. What you're doing on Google is you're creating a new frame of reference with the technology, and that is, on Google, people don't say right or left. They talk about collaborative. They talk about the commons. They talk about distributing and sharing knowledge, correct? That's a sea change. That's the beginning of biosphere consciousness. When young people saw that polar bear and her cub on that ice floe, that little video, and they knew they weren't going to make it, an entire generation was empathizing right there at the moment, not just with the bear and her cub on that ice floe because of climate change, but all our fellow species. We're almost there. We're almost there. Can we get there? I believe the mission here at Google is to take this engine, which is allowing us to connect the central nervous system of the human race and connect every single aspect of this planet into a single embrace, connect that central nervous system, that distributed communication, so we can organize distributed energy, take responsibility for the energy that bathes the planet, distribute our consciousness. And finally, here's what I'd like to see at Google. You start a global conversation right here. What is the purpose of this internet? What is the purpose of Google? Is it more information? More entertainment? Better commerce? That's all it is. That's a pretty tawdry reason to connect the central nervous system of the human race. I'm going to tell you that. And if that is the case, we're going to dummy down the possibilities of saving our species. What Google needs to do is prepare a global conversation on how we begin to use this new internet to ratchet up the conversation, to begin a great global discussion on how we bring the human race together, create biosphere consciousness, help us reduce the temperature on the planet, think as Homo empathicus. Your mission, I think, is to help prepare the groundwork for an empathic civilization. Don't squander this opportunity. Help us lead the way into this new era. I think the mission is clear. Thank you. I was told we should do a few minutes of questions. Anyone?
Try to use
Yes.
the mic. When we talk about these previous revolutions, a lot of them seem to have come fairly top down. Either there was power or wealth opportunities that were seen and seized by those who already had capital to invest. While this one is being prevented mainly by those people, and it doesn't look like those at the top that have the centralized power are really buying into this just yet, and the market's going to take too long from what you're saying for it to catch up. So, I mean, how would you recommend a bottom-up revolution of this?
Well, I'm starting to see it happen. I teach at the Wharton School. I've been there for a long time, and I teach in the executive program. I teach CEOs, our advanced management program. I'm seeing a generational shift, for sure. Though the older generation, still top-down. Patriarchal, from parenting styles, school models, business models, the work. I'm seeing a younger generation in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, distributed, collaborative, open source, they're there. The question is, how do we begin to bring this new distributed thinking together in a synergistic way? So we bring distributed communication together with distributed energy and create a distributed form of consciousness. It's going to be very difficult. I chair something called the Global CEO Third Industrial Revolution Business Roundtable. We have 125 CEOs of leading companies, not the energy companies, but we have all the major renewable energy companies, Pillar 1, the major real estate and construction companies like Cushman Wakefield and CH2M Hills in our group. Pillar 3, we got the major hydrogen companies like UTC, Hydrogenics. Pillar 4, we've got IBM in our group now. Cisco's just joined. You're not, but I would love you to be. We've got Kima in our group. We've got Philips and Schneider, and these are CEOs at their level. And we have the major logistics company. U.S. Postal Service, for example, is in the group. And what we're doing now with this EU mandate is we're going into cities, regions, and countries, collaborating with major cities, regions, and countries to lay down master plans, all in the last year. We just did San Antonio, 7th largest city in the U.S. We're now doing Rome. Rome, the entire Rome, Third Industrial Revolution, 30 years, all post-carbon. We just finished Monaco. We're going to Utrecht next week. We're working with Zapatero for an 8 billion euro rollout in Spain. We're working in Greece, many countries. So I think the will is there among a whole genre of businesses that get this. We would love to have Google right there at the center of this revolution, because you've already extended the central nervous system. Now you have to allow us and help us extend the distributed energy with that central nervous system. Tell your CEOs. Tell your senior manager, we'd love to have them with us so we can begin to develop this process. We don't really want to wait any longer, and we're tired of pilot projects. We want to lay down whole infrastructures in collaboration with regions. Anyone else?
So the EU is mandating things, and you mentioned something about votes being bought by corporations being allowed nowadays. But for the first one, that doesn't sound very distributed to me. And you're getting corporations to basically cooperate with, or governments to cooperate with the corporations to mandate things, probably on the corporation's behalf. So how do you balance this?
I'm glad you asked. We have a set of rules in being involved with this network for Google to know. First of all, our CEOs are two different institutions, global companies and the world's cooperatives. At first, they were uncomfortable with each other. We have the world's banking, construction cooperatives, retail, and housing cooperatives, because we have some litmus tests. When we go into a city or region, first of all, there has to be 3 players at the table: the civil society, the local government, and local business, and it's a collaborative effort with them and us. 2, whatever energy is developed there has to be developed into cooperatives, neighborhood cooperatives, housing cooperatives, small retail cooperatives, so people control their own energy and distribute it across grids. 3, our companies have to engage in new business models like performance contracts. So, for example, Philips is in my group. Rudy Provost is the CEO of Philips Lighting. They would come in, for example, to San Francisco and say, we'll do your outdoor lighting if the community wants it. We'll put in compact fluorescent LED to save energy. It's a performance contract. We'll finance it. The city will pay us back on energy savings. If we can't do the energy savings, we lose. So there's a whole set of new criteria. All energy has to be local. Energy cooperatives have to be set up. Whatever businesses emerge have to be local. And the civil society, local government, and business have to be in a joint collaborative master plan over a period of time with our global cooperatives and businesses. Does that sound good to you? I don't know how else we would do it. That engages everybody at the table. Everyone. So my hope here is you've got a tremendous opportunity here at Google. And you are privileged to be able to be at a place where you can actually begin to roll out the technology that allow us not only to connect our central nervous system, but to connect our energy and connect our consciousness and go to the next stage, which is biosphere awareness, and begin to think about preparing an empathic civilization. You're young, you've got the energy, don't waste it. We need a legacy here, and that legacy is to preserve our species, our fellow creatures in the earth we live in. Thank you.